Hello everybody and welcome to my presentation. On this day we are going to be talking about the anthropogenic impacts of climate change and what this means for our future. Now starting with the first, there we go. Why should we care about climate change? What is climate change? Climate changing will affect not only the physical aspects of it, like the earth, the surface temperatures and whatnot, but also social and economic impacts. The world was only 6 degrees cooler for the Ice Age, which is not a substantial change in the climate. And if you think about it, we're only 1 degree warmer from where we were centuries ago. So, I mean, we are really speeding up the time, the geological time scale, by adding all of the greenhouse gases to us. Now, right now, the world is warming at an unnatural rate just because of the anthropogenic factors that we are currently experiencing. And in this presentation, we will talk about the physical and socioeconomic impacts of this climate change and what it means for our future. All right. So the first physical impact I wanted to talk about is ocean acidification. Now, what does that mean? This pretty much means that as the polar ice caps begin to melt, more of the greenhouse gases, like carbon dioxide especially, that get absorbed by the ocean, increases the salinity of the ocean. Now, you think of the ocean and you think of salt water and you think, well, it's not really a big deal. The ocean's really, really salty anyway. Well, you'd be wrong, because as the ocean continues to increase its salinity and ocean acidification, this leads to many problems for the ecosystems that are living there, especially the corals. The corals can, with the higher temperatures and the higher salinity, the corals will dispel of their colors in what is called bleaching and essentially die, which will make it very hard for any ecosystem and organisms to thrive in these areas. Something else to consider is that the carbonate ions will no longer be available as substantial as they were before, which makes these organisms who produce shells much harder to make these shells, and they're more susceptible to predator and prey, and they can essentially die off. The next one we wanted to talk about is increased precipitation. Now, what someone was saying is that, as wet will get wetter and dry will get drier. So what that means is areas that have a lot of rain are going to have increased rain, like a severe amount of rain. They're going to have more severe storms that increase the rainfall, which will increase flooding, which will increase the loss of fresh water that is available for humans and all species alike, instead of more snow in the winter, which the snow will then melt in the spring and give spring more water to work with. There will be more rain during the winter times, so less rain in the springtime availability that could affect the agricultural timing. And it'll increase flooding, erosion, as well as possible landslides. And then looking into the areas that when dry gets drier, towards the 30-degree latitude kind of equator-ish area, you're going to see a lot more droughts. Now, a lot more droughts will obviously have a huge impact on any kind of water supply available to these people. Now, the third impact that I wanted to look into, which kind of goes hand in hand with ocean acidification, is sea level rising. Now, sea level risings occur a lot due to the polar ice caps melting. So the polar ice caps on the Arctic and Antarctic are these huge, massive ice caps, and they're continuously melting due to the extreme weather changes that are being inflicted on the environment. And what happens with that is the sea level begins to rise. And as the sea level rises, housing communities that live on the coast, there'll be more frequent flooding, more fresh water unavailable for humans, and ocean salinity, like I said before, with ocean acidification will continue to rise, which in turn will affect all the ecosystems in the ocean, make it harder to get fresh seafood for humanity, and so forth. Now, those are the three 3 impacts of the physical environment. Now we're going to look at the national economy global scale. So we have, there we go, impacts on the national economies. Now we're looking at coastal communities in particular that are going to be affected. Now, if you even look at this picture, like this picture shows the impact that the water can have on any coastal properties and the infrastructure there. It is going to cost a lot of money to build barriers to keep all this flooding out. The housing market will go down because nobody's going to want to buy a house when it's so expensive to repair continuously. And then as you have these people leaving these areas, it's called social decay. Social decay will happen, these areas will be abandoned, and the national economy will be severely affected. Now, the next one we're looking at is lower agricultural yields. So looking at before how the snow in the winter affects springtime availability if there's more rain. That is true. So springtime and summertime are huge, important factors for agricultural yield. And if you, with the severe droughts and the severe weather, you can have massive impacts on the agricultural yield in a year, which will induce inflation, produce higher costs for what the demands are, and it can push more people into the poverty line because they can't afford to feed their family on this new inflation demand. Next one we have is damages to infrastructure, roads, any kind of building material. So you have flooding that can cause these bridges to collapse. You can have any kind of severe weather that can cause severe damages to the roads. And it's really expensive to rebuild these roads and bridges. And when that happens, taxes will go up to pay for these repairs. And with the rising taxes, you have people who can't afford it, and they get pushed further and further into the poverty line. This actually has a huge negative impact for seniors, older individuals, people with disabilities and mobility challenges that can't get around and have to figure out ways to work. Now we're going to look at what are the global economic impacts of climate change. Okay, so developing countries will probably be hit the hardest. They rely on agriculture and tourism for their entire economy. And as the agricultural part goes down, you're going to have labor will weaken. Labor will weaken in response to the climate change, which will have an effect on the agricultural yield of that year, which loses productivity, which increases inflation, increases the poverty line, and so forth. Now you have the climate effects. You have the picture on the right-hand side that shows the some of the different effects that the climate change has on agriculture itself, not even including what the labor will have for it. And if you put all of these together, it'll definitely decrease the yield for that year and hurt the entire economy. All right. The next one is increasing health insurance. Now, increasing health insurance poses a huge risk for people who can't afford health insurance even now. You have increasing health insurance because there's more risks. You have the severe weather destroying housing. You have flooding. You have all kinds of stuff that, health insurance now has to take into account, and, they're going to charge people for that. And the more people that can't afford health insurance, the more at risk they're going to be to all of these severe weather events without any help. And it just increases the poverty line even more drastically. Now, the last one that I wanted to talk about was the capital stock being decreased. And it kind of goes hand in hand with the agricultural yield. So you have the labor that decreases with the warming temperatures and less production. So you have less production, which will increase less agricultural yield around the world. And around the world, when you have the agricultural yield, without the labor to produce the supply, the world will struggle to make the ends meet. And in turn, the whole stock market can potentially collapse with the agricultural department as we struggle to maintain the supply and demand for our future. And these are my references. These are the ones that I used for this entire presentation, and I thank you guys for listening so much, and I hope you guys learned a little bit about the physical and socioeconomic impacts of climate change and what you can do to kind of deter the situation and help us in the future. Thank you.